Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 23, Alma 8 through 12. Jesus Christ will come to redeem his people. In this second part with Rian Nelson, Rod discusses Alma and Amulek, and they both tie in many exciting things about geography in the Book of Mormon.
So we talked about the freedom versus liberties here. So, and Alma tarried many days with Amulek before he began to preach to the people. So who is this Amulek guy? Well, that's basically the next part of this is that when he goes back to Ammonihah, there's a guy waiting for him, basically. And he says, are you the guy I'm supposed to meet? Yeah, I'm the guy. And so he brings him in and feeds him and so forth. He says, I'm a Nephite. That is what this Amulek says. He says, I'm a Nephite, and I know that thou art a holy prophet of God, for thou art the man whom an angel said in a vision, thou shalt receive.
Wouldn't that be cool to be Alma and to feel that after all the rejection, and then he comes across this good man. So
he and Amulek, and it was one of the things that, so the two of them, it's interesting because he actually spends quite some time apparently with Amulek before they go out and start to preach to the people of Ammonihah who had already rejected Alma the first time. But this time he comes with a secondary person, and interestingly enough, it's a little bit later in Alma's journeyings and so forth, where the people say, "What? This God is so powerful, and he only sends one guy?
Yeah.
What's the deal? How come you're only sending one guy? If your God's so powerful, how come he didn't send a whole army or whatever? And it's interesting how God really works. That he doesn't necessarily send a whole army. I mean, he sent Joseph Smith, a young lad with hardly any experience in life, basically at the time, and gives him one of the most sacred and important visions in the whole history of mankind to a 14-year-old. So God doesn't necessarily always work with professionals and those who are trained in the ministry and those who are supposedly experts in different things.
But he kind of goes with those. The norm.
In fact, that's the rule, pretty much.
Kind of like he was born in a stable, so to speak. He wasn't born in the Taj Mahal.
Exactly.
So to speak,
exactly. Yep. Exactly. I think it's interesting that Amulek basically becomes a second witness. So when they were all on their own, they didn't have a second witness. But now we have Amulek saying, "Hey, an angel. I'm one of you. I've seen this." He said he's a Nephite, though, so he must have been like maybe a dissenter or maybe a descendant of a dissenter previously. And so he basically goes out there with Alma and they preach together. And they apparently are still not accepted very well because they're thrown in dungeons and they've got all kinds of things that are going on there. But then they finally are done, and they head over to have a mission in the land of Ammonihah. This is in chapter 9. So this is on the 7th month and the 4th day. They take off and they go. This is chapter 9, verse 1. And again, I, Alma, having been commanded of the Lord of God that I should take Amulek and go forth and preach unto this people. For the people who were in the city of Ammonihah, it came to pass the people who were in the city of Ammonihah, it came to pass, as I began to preach unto them, they began to contend with me, saying, Who art thou? Suppose ye that we shall believe the testimony of one man? Although he should preach unto us that the earth should pass away, understood not the words which they spake, for they knew not that the earth should pass away. And they said also, We will not believe thy words if thou shouldst prophesy that this great city should be destroyed in one day. And then verse 6, and they said, Who is God that sendeth no more authority than one man among this people to declare unto them the truth of such great and marvelous things? But now Amulek basically gets up and he says, It's not just one man, it's me too.
Yeah, this is where Amulek becomes known. Maybe he was a closet Nephite at that time. Maybe people didn't know him, but maybe he was a good example to him there and was waiting for the right moment to join somebody.
Well, if I remember right, I think it says that he was quite wealthy and well thought of. He was quite a respected individual in the community.
And maybe he didn't show his religiosity. Maybe he did, but
in fact, let me see if I can find that. Oh yes, in verse this is in chapter 10, verse 4. It says, "Behold, I am also a man of no small reputation among all those who know me. Yea, and behold, I have many kindreds and friends, and I have also acquired much riches by the hand of my industry. Nevertheless, after all this, I never have known much of the ways of the Lord, and his mysteries and marvelous power.
There we go.
So even though he was rich,
but he was
pretty
humble.
well known, he was not really a man of God.
Yeah.
At that point in time, until he met with Alma.
Until maybe the angel said, "Hey, this is who you're going to meet."
Yeah.
And then he goes, "Oh, I guess maybe I am religious."
Yeah. Yeah. And now earlier on, we actually you mentioned this, Ryan, but basically this is chapter 9, and let's see, this is verse 19. About 3/4 of the way through it says, well, I'll just read verse 19. For he will not suffer you that ye shall live in your iniquities to destroy his people. I say unto you, nay, he would rather suffer that the Lamanites might destroy all his people, who were called the people of Nephi, if it were possible that they could fall into sins and transgressions after having had so much light and so much knowledge given unto them of the Lord, their God. After having been such a highly favored people of the Lord, yea, and after having been favored above every other nation, kindred, tongue, and people, and after having all things made known unto them, according to their desires and their faith and prayers, and that which has been, and which is to come. Anyway, then he's talking about all of these blessings that they have had, how they've been delivered from famine and had the gift of translation, the Holy Ghost, and so forth, and basically saying where much is given, much is required. It
has to do with the United States of America. Okay, all that we've been given here, we've got these blessings because of who we are, really. We came here, we've been given a land. Okay, what are you going to do with it? We can either be, under God's law or not. And the more good that we do, the more it's really a responsibility we have. It's not responsible for the people of Russia to share the gospel with us. It's the other way around. Now, if they don't, they won't be held as accountable as if we don't, because we've got the higher covenant upon ourselves through being part of this land.
That's right. Because there is this sacred covenant with God, and the covenant basically is that God is going to give us the land, posterity, prosperity, and security. And in exchange for that, he needs us to use those blessings for one major purpose, and that is to take the gospel to all the other nations of the earth.
And to the Lamanites. Again, it comes back. How important are the Lamanites and the Jewish people? The last will be first, the first will be last. And the day of the Gentiles here, it's going away quickly. Think about how many baptisms there are in England. There used to be tons. Now you can't get anything out of England. Well, the Gentiles...
Or out of Europe, for that matter.
Yeah, the Gentiles have come over here, and the good ones are here. And, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't mean it that way. The ones that are baptized that are here, the ones that are stuck in their ways are still over there. Well, the day of the Gentiles is going away. Who's joining the church by leapfrogs? It's those in South America. It's the Asians. It's those people that have never experienced something like this. Those people in Africa. There's a lot of others that are not Gentiles that are now joining the church.
Yeah. I think that one of the messages here in Alma chapter 9 is that basically those who have been given such marvelous blessings are held to a different standard because they have seen, they have been taught, they have had parents, they have lived with their needs, basically their needs and so forth being met. And so this is in verse this is again chapter 9, verse 23. And now behold, I say unto you that if this people who have received so many blessings from the hand of the Lord should transgress contrary to the hand of the Lord, or contrary to the light and knowledge which they do have, I say unto you that if this be the case, that if they should fall into transgression, it would be far more tolerable for the Lamanites than for them. For behold, the promises of the Lord are extended to the Lamanites, but they are not unto you if ye transgress. For has not the Lord expressly promised and firmly decreed that if ye will rebel against him, then ye shall utterly be destroyed from off the face of the earth?
That just jumped out at me again. What I just said is what I felt for a long time. That just now, after all the times I've read the Book of Mormon, all the times we've edited this and everything else, that just now jumped out to me like, there it is. There's what I've been feeling. That's right there, and I've read it probably 100 times, but never really felt it.
Yeah.
Until you just now read it. That's cool.
So then in Alma chapter 10, Basically, he says, now these were the words with Amulek preached to the people who were in the land of Ammonihah. And this is what he said. I love this because this has a pattern in Native Americans even to this day. And that is when a Native American is going to introduce themselves to a crowd or to people, they don't just get up and say, "Hi, I'm such and such." They go, "I am such and such of this clan, of this tribe, of whatever."
Like Betty does, LaFontaine, all the time. I am of the Salt Clan, of the Weed Eater people, of the Tortoise Feeders, of the 9th District, of the, and they know who you are because of your lineage. Yeah.
And so here, and this is what Amulek is doing here. He says, now these are the words which Amulek preached, right? He says, "I am Amulek, I am the son of Gedana, who was the son of Ishmael, who was a descendant of Aminadai, and it was the same Aminadai who interpreted the writing which was upon the wall of the temple, which was written by the finger of God, and Aminadai was a descendant of Nephi, who was the son of Lehi, who came out of the land of Jerusalem, who was the descendant of Manasseh, who was the son of Joseph, who was sold into Egypt by the hands of his brethren." So he basically is now saying, "This is who I am. Yeah. This is my lineage.
You better respect it, because
yes, exactly." But he's letting them know where he stands in the line of authorities, basically.
Because of their oral traditions and so forth. They know through those names of every time they say another name, their respect goes up another notch for them, another notch, until they go, "Wow, this is who that is. Mm-hmm. I better listen, and if I don't, look out. Here it comes."
Yep. All right, so let's see. I'm just going to mention a couple other notes that I had from his. Alma and Amulek have power. They can't be held in dungeons. They could not be slain. They went forth in power, and they were still in Ammonihah here. It also shows how much difference one person can make. I mean, sometimes don't you feel like you're
alone.
You're alone.
Yeah.
You're maybe in a job where there's no other members of the church or whatever, and you're just kind of like getting picked on or whatever, or you just think that my life isn't making any difference to anybody else. I could be gone and nobody would even notice, but that's actually not the case. Basically, it's amazing how much difference every person's life.
Like out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall all things be established. And a lot of times trying to be one witness is not very easy. I mean, you have a second witness, it helps.
Yep. And then let's see, a couple other things. Let's see. In verse 6, I wanted to mention that. When talking about who is God that sendeth no more authority than one man. It's interesting because we as human beings have this tendency to think that if we can get several other people to agree with us, then it must be true.
Right.
Okay. And how many times has the consensus been flat wrong? How many times have people gathered a whole bunch of scientists together and made a claim that turned out to be completely bogus and false?
All day long, including the Einstein theory of whatever.
Right. So just because there's a whole group of people who all tend to agree about something, like
the consensus is
evolution.
in.
Yeah. If everybody agrees that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America, well, it must be true then, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case, because God has his servants. His servants have spoken. That their words are in the book. And then he has prophets who basically help us to understand those words more clearly.
And they witness in the name of Jesus Christ. How powerful is that? Maybe we don't think. How many times have we been in a difficult situation? I always imagine that if I was in a tough situation where it's my life and I'm told to deny Christ or to deny the Book of Mormon, I really feel in my heart what I would say. I really feel strongly what I'd say, that I will not deny. I will not deny. What more powerful witness do you have? Who's ultimately in charge? The Lord. If I'm to deny he who is ultimately in charge of everything. If you ever look at Peter, the cock crowed 3 times. That doesn't mean Peter's a bad man. It means he's human. It means he saw 400 people coming at him maybe, and I just got to deny this guy. I'll be okay.
Yeah, but the thing is Peter did not deny Christ.
No, he didn't. He denied
that he was his friend, that he was close to.
That's right. I don't know this guy.
No, he is not the Savior of the world.
Right.
No, he is not a son of God.
Right.
He never denied him.
Right.
What he did was he distanced himself from him.
That's
and
the Lord.
Yeah. And also he had to also make sure. God needed to make sure that Peter lived to tell the tale, And so, and to continue to carry on the church for a while. Yeah. So in that particular case, it's kind of like Nephi, that we are commanded not to kill, right? Thou shalt not kill,
but kill Laban.
Because it's a higher, it's a higher law that's being followed, and the highest law is to follow God.
And we need to learn, like Peter did. He needs to be tried those 3 times to really develop his relationship, because the apostles really didn't even understand that Christ was resurrected. I mean, even though it was taught to them, maybe 30 days, whatever, not that much, but they were taught, and yet when it happened, they go, what? No, what do you mean alive? Well, you just preached that, Well, we have to be tried in all things, and it makes us stronger. I love trials. My good aunt said, I don't worry in life when I have a trial. I worry when I don't. Because when I don't have a trial, I'm not digging deep enough. I'm not looking at how I can overcome it. Because there's got to be either good or bad that comes from every trial. You either love the Lord more or you hate Him more. But you don't stay neutral.
Yeah. It's just like the silversmith guy. Basically, if you're not getting heated up, then your impurities are not being taken out.
Yeah.
So
and that's what I justify when I sin. Anyway, if that's
yeah. So I just going to give one last example of an entire, basically, millions upon millions of people being led in the wrong direction because of consensus. The Nicene Creed. That God is without body parts or passions and so forth. It's a small group of men who all got together and say, okay, we all agree on the nature of God. Mm-hmm. And then that basically is what was held sway for generations, and millions upon millions of people have been taught the false philosophies because somebody believed in consensus. Brothers and sisters, if there's a consensus about something, and that consensus isn't squaring with the gospel and with the scriptures, then you can say that it doesn't matter if everyone is against you. If you stand with God, then you're going to be always on the right side.
It's kind of like global warming. They always say the consensus is in. Well, there's plenty of people that don't believe that man causes global warming. There's a lot of people that believe that global warming happens, global cooling happens, change happens, whatever. But me paying carbon taxes is not going to change. Who's in charge of the world? Is it God or is it man? Man's not in charge.
Well, they want to put themselves in charge.
That's right.
To basically be able to
get
control
rid of
people.
God. Yeah. I know.
And to set us up as that we are the saviors of the world and not God. God doesn't need us to save the world. No. He can handle it himself. All right, so let's see. Then need to keep the commandments. Let's see a couple other things here.
So this is we're talking about Alma 8 through 12 now, which is a continued part of this lesson, right? Because we went through 5 through 7 earlier.
Yeah.
But this is a continuation now of Alma 8 through 13.
Okay, now let's see. Yeah, so we're actually moving on through. This is in chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 14. I had a couple of things I wanted to mention there. Let's see. There's more than one witness there. Okay, yeah. This is on the top of page 220 in the Annotated Book of Mormon. Lawyers seek to cross Amulek's words. And this is verse 14. Now it was those men who sought to destroy them who were lawyers, who were hired or appointed by the people to administer the law at times of their trials, or at the trials of the crimes of the people before the judges. Now, the way I read this, though, they're definitely lawyers, but they are administering the law. Okay,
so they're administrators.
They're not judges, judges and so forth, right? But they're before the people. Let's see, verse 15. Now these lawyers were learned in all the arts and cunning of the people, which is true. I mean, that's basically what the law profession does: is they learn the law and so forth, but also how to defend and how to prosecute, and so forth, these laws. And this was to enable them that they might be skillful in their profession. And it came to pass that they began to question Amulek, that thereby they might make him cross his words or contradict the words which he should speak.
Michael Flynn.
My goodness gracious.
Oh, my heavens. You mean the Book of Mormon talks about things today that are happening in our government today? And we say, why do we have to politicize the gospel? Because it is politics. This gospel is going to rise or fall based upon if we elect good leaders and we hold them accountable. Are they moral or not? And those people that went to make Michael Flynn guilty, it's atrocious. 3 years later, we find out it's a trap. Just like we're talking about in Alma.
That's right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, they brought people out specifically when the administration, the incoming administration, was not fully up to speed. Actually,
we'll just send a couple of guys in to take
advantage of that. Told him he didn't need to have his lawyer, an attorney or anything with him, and they were doing that primarily so they could try to cross him up.
And they did.
And that's
they
what
got
happened.
him to lie because they threatened his son.
That's happened so many times. It's just ridiculous how this is going on, because this is the things that are going on even right now as we speak, even in our own government.
Doesn't that help you love the Book of Mormon? If we have a problem, let's say we're coming to that point in our life and we read that. That does this to me. It kind of sets me off like, what can I do to get rid of that or overcome that?
Yep. In verse 17, says, now they knew not that Amulek could know of their designs, but it came to pass, as they began to question him, he perceived their thoughts, and he said unto them, O ye wicked and perverse generation, ye lawyers and hypocrites, for ye are laying the foundations of the devil, for ye are laying traps and snares to catch the holy ones of God. Now, that hasn't, I don't see that has really happened yet, as far as within the church, that we have basically media or governmental people who are literally trying to ensnare or trap our prophet or our leaders. But I think that, this is an example of how that could happen.
It's true. I think it could very well be happening if we really looked into it. There's so much immorality going on in this world.
Oh, it's unbelievable, yeah. This is verse 18. Ye are laying plans to pervert the ways of the righteous, and to bring down the wrath of God upon your heads, even to the utter destruction of this people. Yea, well did Mosiah say, who was our last king, when he was about to deliver up the kingdom, having no one to confer it upon, causing that his people should be governed by their own voices. Yea, well did he say, that if the time should come, that the voice of this people should choose iniquity, that is, if the time should come that this people should fall into transgression, they would be ripe for destruction.
And they didn't say that Mosiah was their last king, like the most removed one, the one that he's our last king. Okay? We're going to now have nothing but the reign of the judges. And if we can't trust our 9 judges, what can we trust? We're kind of evenly divided in our judiciary today, aren't we? We're close 5-4 here. What would people do to a Judge Kavanaugh to keep him out? What's going to happen to the next one? It's a
would they be willing to bear
amazing.
False witness against somebody like that?
And it's happened.
Yeah.
It's like amazing.
Yep. And then verse 22. So basically it's talking about repent ye. Well, this is in verse 28. Repent ye, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Verse 21. I will come down among my people with equity and justice in my hands. These are the words of the Lord. Verse 22. Yea, I say unto you that if it were not for the prayers of the righteous who are now in the land, that ye would even now be visited with utter destruction.
There we go.
Yet it would not be by flood, as it were the people in the days of Noah, but would be by famine and pestilence and the sword. But it is the prayers of the righteous that ye are spared.
And notice how he doesn't say
so beautiful.
He doesn't say by the fire. He says by the flood, pestilence, and the sword, which is how he's getting rid of them today. Whereas at the great last coming, the Savior will come with fire and will be burned. So there was the water, there's the sword and pestilence, and then there's fire. So this is kind of an in-between type of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing I think is so critical, and as brothers and sisters, what is keeping our nation from being utterly destroyed now? I think it's the prayers of the righteous. Yeah. Are you one of them? Do you pray for our nation? Do you pray for its leaders? Do you pray that we will be able to remain free people of liberty, people who choose God and live accordingly? And it's interesting because here again, this is now in verse 24, it says, and now it came to pass that the people were more angry with Amulek, and they cried out, saying, this man doth revile against our laws, which are just, and our wise lawyers whom we have selected.
Yeah, our guys came up with it. It can't be wrong.
Yeah, he's reviling against us. Oh no. And Amalek stretched forth his hand and cried the mitre unto them, saying, O ye wicked and perverse generation, why hath Satan got such great hold upon your hearts? Why will ye yield yourselves unto him, that he may have power over you, to bind your eyes, that ye will not understand the words which are spoken according to the truth? For behold, I have testified against, for behold, I have testified against, for behold, have I testified against your law? Ye do not understand. Ye say that I have spoken against your law, but I have not. But I have spoken in favor of your law, to your condemnation. And now behold, I say unto you that the foundation of the destruction of this people is beginning to be laid by the unrighteousness of your lawyers and your judges.
They're becoming ripe for what's going to happen.
And it's just getting started. So actually, and as you read the Book of Mormon, you'll find out that actually is the case. This is the beginning of their end, when they started to listen to these leaders, basically, who are unrighteous.
Yeah, who have made the law to be good towards them, so that they can be favored by it. So we come out with this great big heavy law nobody will ever read, and when we want, we can pick this little part of it and say, "See, I'm right," and nobody ever knew it was in there. So I mean, it's just so deceptive.
Well, yeah, but we have to get the law passed so we can.
That's right.
Find out what's in it.
Yeah, and I know, brothers and sisters, we're not giving up our patriot. We're not letting you know who we favor. Really in this government, they probably don't know that by now, do they?
Well,
but you know what? There are great people on both sides of the aisle, and thank heavens for a double government, so to speak, two powers that help each other stay in checks with each other. I remember growing up.
Compare and contrast the two of them.
Yeah, I growing up, my mom and dad, I remember, liked JFK, and he had some real good policies, I understood. And I understood just later, when I was a teenager, that JFK was okay, but who was after him was not so good, because he was a Republican, I remember. And then, now the more I've been able to look at it myself, I'm really conservative. I think there's problems in both parties.
Absolutely.
But I'm conservative, meaning I'm voting for liberty. I'm voting for God's law.
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, the Lord gave that revelation to Joseph Smith. He said that the law of the land, which is constitutional, is justifiable before me. Anything more or less than this cometh of evil.
That's right.
So then you have the showdown with Zeezrom, basically, the lawyer. He questions Amalek. He says Zeezrom was a man who was expert in the devices of the devil, that he might destroy that which was good. Therefore he said unto Amalek, will ye answer the questions which I put to you? And he says, yeah.
Of course.
And Zeezrom says, behold, here is 6 onties of silver. I'll give these to you if you deny the existence of a supreme being. I mean, that's going right for the jugular.
That's a real hard one, isn't it?
That's like,
a guy who has no money, who's living off the land. I don't need money. What do you do? That's an easy one.
Yeah, but to somebody like Zeezrom, where everything revolves around money, he thinks anybody can be bought.
Right.
And he's not going to get bought.
Well, he's not
being bought,
today, is he? Yeah.
It says, and Zeezrom said unto him, behold, let's see. And Amalek says, O thou child of hell. He really was sugarcoating it there, wasn't he? Why tempt ye me? Knowest thou that the righteous yieldeth not to such temptations?
Like the Savior on the Mount. Remember, again, these 3 temptations.
Yep. And Zeezrom said unto him, Thou sayest there is a true and living God. And Amalek said, Yea, there is a true and living God. And he said, Is there more than one God? And he says, No. Now Zeezrom said unto him, How knowest thou these things? And he said, Because an angel has showed them unto me. And he says, Who is he that shall come? Is it the Son of God? And he says, Yes.
Ah, there you go.
Shall he save his people in their sins? And Amalek answered and said unto him, I say unto you, he shall not, for it is impossible for him to deny his word. Anyway, it's a great...
But you're talking about 2 gods here now.
Thing,
you're saying there's one, but there's another one. Who's the son of him? What are you talking about? You're just going against yourself. And that's where the good Catholics will come and say, no, it's the Trinity. Yeah, there's only one. They're all 3 in one, but there's only one,
Exactly.
But we're talking about they're separate here. So it's fun to see.
Yeah, and that's actually where he gets into it right here in verse 4, 44. Towards the end of it says, and shall be brought and be arraigned before the bar of Christ, the Son, and God the Father, and the Holy Spirit, which is one eternal God. There's so many people have said, well, there you go. Right in your own Book of Mormon is the Trinity.
That's right.
One God, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
But brought
one
before
God.
the bar. That's somewhere in here, as I remember editing.
Yeah.
Is that here?
Yeah, before the bar of Christ.
Before the bar. Read that part that they know. Isn't there a little anecdote about what that means, being brought before the bar? I think David said something about that and wrote a little.
And even there shall not so much as a hair of their heads be lost, but everything shall be restored to its perfect frame as it is now, or in the body, and shall be brought and be arraigned before the bar of Christ, the Son of God, the Holy, the God, and God the Father, and the Holy Spirit, which is one eternal God, to be judged according to their works, whether they be good or whether they be evil.
Yeah, but the bar of God is what I'm looking for. There's something in here that's a little gold, something on the bottom about the bar of God, and what that really means, as I recall. We'll get to it later. But I thought that's maybe, as I was hearing that, that's where it was talking about.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was, but it was kind of insightful, just a little sentence or two about the bar of God.
Yeah. So, and bottom line, there's so much more that we could get into about this whole thing. That's a great study area to jump into. But for
find
example,
the bar of God in there. Find it, and I'll send you a book in PDF.
Okay. All right. Now we need to keep moving here because we got to let's see. Behold, the scriptures before you.
Where are you at
if
now?
you rest
Alma.
them. Let's see here. So, okay, this is that we're going to go on over here to Alma chapter 14. This is one of my. It's a favorite story,
Well, remember,
but it's one
Alma
of the sad
13
ones.
is great because that talks all about the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the priesthood is so. If you will honor your priesthood and love, you'll read Alma 13. The way that they lay it out of the importance of the priesthood and the higher order and so forth, I think is beautiful. The way he puts it in 13.
He talks about King Melchizedek,
Yeah,
and so forth. It kind of brings all that up
it.
into it. The priesthood. Let's see. It says, "Behold, the scriptures are before you. If you will wrest them, it shall be to your own destruction." What do you think that means, to wrest the scriptures?
Ignore them.
Well, I think it's trying to twist them.
Rest. Yeah, twist them. Yeah,
I mean, when
that's
you
probably a
wrestle,
better word.
basically, you're kind of grappling with it. You're trying to.
Yeah.
In other words, you're trying to figure out ways around it.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's basically what.
That's not a word you
resting
think
is.
of too much. W-R-E-S-T, resting the scriptures.
Mm-hmm. But that's basically, what does that mean? For example, it says in the scriptures that Noah built an ark, and that the waters of the flood covered the entire earth and all the high mountains and everything, right? And if you want to rest the scriptures, you say, well, it never said specifically Mount Everest.
Yeah.
It never said it covered Mount Everest, so we can say, well, we don't know.
Maybe it only went up 20,000
or maybe it was just a local flood.
Yeah.
And he sailed across this lake.
Yeah. It's probably a myth, because how silly is it to think of 2x2 and animals getting on aboard a big ship?
Well, not only
what did
that,
you do with the dinosaurs?
Where did all the water come from?
Yeah.
And where did it all go?
Gee.
And all those answers can be had if you understand, if you believe first in the scriptures.
Right.
And then the true science actually backs those things up.
Yeah.
And you actually can see that in the Universal Model Project. So, but behold the scriptures, we need to trust in God's words, basically. This is from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 17. This is on page 226 in the Annotated Book of Mormon. And he, that is Joseph Smith Jr., has translated the book, that is the Book of Mormon. This is the Lord speaking. Even that part which I have commanded him, and as your Lord and your God liveth, it is true. And we have a couple of quotes by President Ezra Taft Benson. He said, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe the Book of Mormon to be the Word of God. That's from the Articles of Faith, number 8. God has so declared it, so have its writers, so have its witnesses, and so do all those who have read it and received a personal revelation from God as to its full truthfulness. In section 20 of the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord says that he gave Joseph Smith, quote, power from on high to translate the Book of Mormon, which contains the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which was given by inspiration, unquote. And then final quote here, grave consequences hang in our response to the Book of Mormon. Those who receive it, saith the Lord, in faith and work righteousness shall receive a crown of eternal life. But those who harden their hearts in unbelief and reject it, it shall turn to their own condemnation, for the Lord God hath spoken it. That's from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 20.
One of the last things President Monson said, one of his last talks, was to read the Book of Mormon And one of President Nelson's first was to read the Book of Mormon. I still remember President Benson being one who emphasized read the Book of Mormon. I mean, we have been taught that so much, but that's why I love this book that helps me understand the true book of Jesus Christ, the true Book of Mormon, by little things that help me stop and think deeper as I go through. And that's why I love this so much.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, we need to get to the final thing because we still have not even gotten to the geography stuff here on this whole thing. So, okay, so moving along here. So, Alma, chapter 17, verse 1, and now it came to pass that as Alma was journeying from the land of Gideon southward away to the land of Manti, behold, to his astonishment, he met the sons of Mosiah journeying towards the land of Zarahemla. And that talks about Ammon and Ishmael, in the land of Ishmael, I should say, with King Lamoni. And what happened with him and the flocks and so forth, and how that I love that story. We all know that story, but Ammon basically defends the king's flocks. I loved it to kind of the little bit of a joke here, but basically it was one of the first great acts of disarmament, as he disarmed with his sword.
Disarmed many.
Several of the people who stood at the waters of Sebus to scatter the flocks of the king.
We didn't get to talk about the destruction of Ammoni in Alma 16 with my cool little map here that Nancy's going to show to us. That's not in the Annotated Book of Mormon. Okay. It shares with us that how the Lamanites began to march from they became so wicked. And this just shows you the direction. All the Lamanites came together at Ammonihah to thwart the Nephites. So the Nephites just went in and blew it up, and it was done so well that what they do to the last man on the tree, they fell the tree with the guy that they chopped it down, and he went over the cliff, and and that's kind of a story of the Iroquois Indians with Daganoweda. Yeah. And how there was a great man who they cut the tree and it went down, but he ended up not down the falls. He ended up at dinner with them the next night as kind of a miracle story of what happens. And there's some truth in some of these origins of the Iroquois and the natives that blend really nicely with the gospel. And I wrote a blog about the felling of the tree. That's why I bring that up, because it was something I just wrote about again. It's fun every day. Yeah, 3 or 4 days ago about the tree was felled or something like that.
That's awesome. All right, so let's see. So chapter 17, we were just talking about that, and Ammon. Basically, this is Ammon and the king of Lamoni. We mentioned earlier previously in this series of podcasts here in chapter 17, verse 32, and it came to pass that they went in search of the flocks, and they did follow Ammon, and they rushed forth with much swiftness, and did head the flocks of the king, and did gather them together again to the place of water. So this is talking about the word head and how it's used to actually get around in front of or have an intersection with the sheep rather than going to the place where they started from. All right, so let's see. Ammon smites off the arms of the Lamanites. Chapter 18, King Lamoni basically thinks Ammon is a great spirit because of his power. Amazing story here. I love that, but again, you guys have all probably read those things before.
And remember, they talk about the Great Spirit like the Native Americans talk about the Great Spirit, Jesus Christ, And that is part of this tradition. The Great Spirit is the Savior Jesus Christ in their I don't hear about that in other cultures. The Great Spirit, only a Native American Indian talks that way, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a throwback to their origins here as the Book of Mormon people. So then Ammon then preaches to King Lamoni, and he talks about God. I love this. He says, Ammon said, "Believest thou that there is a great spirit?" He said, "Yea." And Ammon said, "This is God." Because he asked him, "Do you believe in God?" And he says, "I don't know what that means."
Isn't that funny? And that's amazing, isn't it? That word.
Not making the connection there. And I think that tells us that another important thing is that he spoke to him according to his understanding.
Yeah.
When he first said, "Do you believe in God?" He says, what is that?
Yeah. He says, "You never heard of it."
Do you believe in the Great Spirit? Well, oh yeah, I believe in the Great Spirit. Okay, so bottom line is folks, when you're talking to the
condescend
other people about
yeah.
about other people. It's not condescending. You are basically using language that they understand.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I mean you're
Not the total
saying
condensation.
not condensation.
Condescension.
Must be getting late here. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, condescension.
Rod's
All right.
funny when he gets.
And Ammon said, "This is God." Okay. Now this is another thing I love. This is in verse 36 of chapter 18, right at the very bottom of page 235, in the Annotated Book of Mormon. The reason why I love this so much is because I've actually tried to implement this in my own opportunities to share this research with people, and that is that. And this is actually twice. Ammon does it here, and then later on, one of the other sons of Mosiah actually do it as well. But as he started to teach King Lamoni, he basically said this. This is verse 36. Now, when Ammon had said these words, he began at the creation of the world.
There we go.
And also the creation of Adam, and told him all the things concerning the fall of man, and rehearsed and laid before him the records and the holy scriptures of the people, which had been spoken by the prophets even down to the time that their father Lehi had left Jerusalem.
That validates for us today how important the Bible is to them, how important the Bible is to us and the Old Testament. I mean, some people just throw it off like it's not. Hey, I love the Old Testament. There's some cool stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. But also, I think it's important that people get an understanding of where they fit in the grand scheme of things. Right. And when you start from the very beginning, from the creation of the world, and you move it up through, and you talk about these promised lands and the promised and the covenant people and so forth, then all of a sudden they understand where they fit in the grand plan.
I can touch and feel Adam at 4,000 BC. I can't get a hold of pre-Adamites 100,000 years ago or a million years ago. You know, some things are simple enough that they just make sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the Bible has the entire chronology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it goes back that
boom,
far.
Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. King Lamoni is overcome. Basically, we all know about the story here. I just want to get to this and I love the story, but we just don't have time to get into it in more detail than this. I just want to move over to basically. Then the Lord commands Ammon to go to the land of Midian. So Ammon goes over there. The father of Lamoni is angry, and basically they have the showdown between Lamoni and Ammon, and then Ammon basically strikes the father down basically, and he says, "Listen, if you don't kill me, I'll give you up to half of or he'll give you all of the kingdom." I think he said. He said, "Listen, all I want to have is my brothers, basically the sons of Mosiah, or the son that
kind of like the story of Joseph in the Bible."
Yeah, it says, I want your son to be able to reign his people and without harassment from you.
There you go. Oh, done. Is that all you want? You got it.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool how that actually works out there.
There's a lot of people that became second, like Moses and Joseph, and they became second in the kingship or so forth.
Yep. Let's see. There was talking about now the father of Lamoni commanded him that he should slay Ammon with his sword, and he wouldn't. Says, "I will not slay Ammon." And then he became angry. We actually have a wonderful quote here by President Gordon B. Hinckley. It was a conference report in 1991 that he says that he talks about how when anger takes over, the strength of reason leaves. And when Lamoni's father became angry with him, he apparently must not. I mean, he seriously underestimated Ammon's ability to fight with a sword, basically, because he wounded him in his arm, and then the next thing he knows, he's basically at the mercy of Ammon, and he's pleading for his life.
What a great concept to teach to our children, and for us as parents, that when you become angry, you lose it. You might as well go away for a while, because whatever you say or do ain't going to square it. It's hard.
Yeah, and I would imagine that King Lamoni had probably had a lot of training, military-type training or self-defense training and so forth. So I think he was taken aback by the fact that Ammon was able to do this, which also I think tells us that that Ammon had
was
not taken it
respected.
lightly either.
Yeah.
He had prepared himself to be able to protect himself and his family and his friends and
And
so
you see
forth.
all these people as mighty men. These aren't little people. They're big, powerful, strong of spirit men. They're like we think of the stud athlete in high school that's 6'2", 185 pounds, rippling, that gains respect because they're so humble and good. You know, every school has those. And that's kind of like the people you respect in the Book of Mormon that have that.
Anyway, so they get Ammon's brethren are released from prison, and he's a little bit concerned by the fact that they've been severely mistreated while in prison. Then chapter 21. Now when Ammon, this is verse 1, and now when Ammon and his brethren separated themselves in the borders of the land of the Lamanites, behold, Aaron took his journey towards the land which was called by the Lamanites Jerusalem. So they had named a city after the old city, calling it after the land of their father's nativity, and it was away joining the borders of Mormon. Now the Lamanites and the Amalekites and the people of Amulon had built a great city which was called Jerusalem. So now Aaron goes and he preaches to the Amalekites there in Jerusalem.
This guy's cunning. This
yeah.
guy is something else.
Yep.
A piece of apostate work.
Yeah, yep. And they said, behold, we have built sanctuaries, and we do assemble ourselves together to worship God. We do believe that God will save all men. But here Aaron is saying, except you repent, you shall perish, right? And so they were angry with him, began to mock him. They would not hear the words which he spake. And then they contended with many about the word. Okay, there's other people who came. Aaron of Mulakai and Alma went to the land of Madani to preach at this point in time in verse 11.
Or is it Aha? A-H-A?
A-M-M-A-H.
Oh, that's right. There's that one too. And then Aha
Alma.
is another one.
Yeah. It came to at the verse 12. This is again chapter 21, verse 12. And it came to pass that they saw that the people would harden their hearts. Therefore they departed, came over to the land of Madani, and they did preach the word unto many, and few believed on the words which they taught. And so then Aaron and his brethren were imprisoned, basically. And then we get over here. Ammon and Lamoni returned to the land of Ishmael, which is where King Lamoni was from. They were there. It came to pass that they
think of these important
returned
names in their history and where they started. They build on that all the time.
Yeah, and then we get finally to chapter 22, which is where we wanted to really finish up here. So Alma chapter 22, Aaron preaches to King Lamoni's father, and basically so now Ammon while he was thus teaching the people of Lamoni continually, will return to the account of Aaron and his brethren. For after he departed from the land of Madani, he was led by the Spirit to the land of Nephi, even to the house of the king. Mm-hmm. So he was led by the Spirit right to the king's house. Yeah. And which was over all the land, save it were the land of Ishmael, and he was the father of Lamoni. It came to pass that he went in unto the king's palace with the brethren and bowed himself before the king, and basically says, O king, if thou wilt spare our lives, we will be thy servants. And the king says, Arise, I will grant unto you your lives, and will not suffer you should be my servants, but I will insist that ye shall administer unto me. And so now they teach the gospel now to King Lamoni's father.
So similar stories throughout of how they treat people, and if you'll do this, I'll do this, or you can have half of that, or you can have one of my 8 daughters, or whatever.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of interesting because he also says that he got with when King Lamoni's father, the king of the Lamanites, must have really had a deep respect for Aaron, or for Ammon, I mean, for what he did, because he even though he's talking with Aaron, he's going, gosh, well, how come Ammon didn't come? He said, well, and I love this. Now the king said unto them, What is this that ye have said about concerning the Lord? Be told, let's see.
Disappointed they got Aaron instead of Ammon?
Well, the king was kind of disappointed that Aaron came.
Yeah.
For he says, let's see, this is in verse 3. And now, O king, if thou wilt spare our lives. And he says, I've been somewhat troubled in my mind because of the generosity and the greatness of the words of my brother Ammon. Right. Thy brother Ammon, and I desire to know the cause why he has not come up out of Madoni with thee. And Aaron said unto the king, Behold, the Spirit of the Lord has called him another way. Basically, he pulled the the revelation card.
Well, and by the way, he gave
The Lord told him to go a different place.
He got the king to think of something else. That there's not just a great spirit. There's great servants. There's other people that have a spirit within them. So that was teaching the king.
Mm-hmm. Yep. He went to the land of Ishmael to teach the people of Ammoni. Now the king said unto them, What is this that ye have said concerning the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, this is the thing which doth trouble me.
Yeah. He didn't know God. Now he doesn't know what Spirit of the Lord means, but he knows what great spirit is.
Yep. And so then he explains that. And so verse 9, the king said, Is God that great spirit that brought our fathers out of the land of Jerusalem? And Aaron said unto him, Yea. He is that great spirit, and he createth all things both in heaven and the earth. Yeah. Believest thou this? And he said, Yea, I believe the great spirit created all things, and I desire that you should tell me more about this.
How, like that, he was converted. Yeah. Oh, was that the great spirit? Yeah. I believe. It's like he was ready for it. He already felt it. Yeah. He felt in his heart. This was true.
Yeah. And now Aaron
Aaron becomes as great as Ammon in his eyes.
Yeah. And again, a second time now, Aaron starts to teach the king of the Lamanites. And he says, And Aaron saw that the king would believe his words, and it came to pass that when Aaron saw that the king would believe his words, he began from the creation of Adam,
second time,
reading the scriptures unto the king, how God created man after his own image, and that God gave him commandments, and that because of transgression man had fallen. And then Aaron did expound unto him the scriptures from the creation of Adam, laying the fall of man before him, and their carnal state, and also the plan of redemption.
What are the pillars?
So he just started to go through the whole history of the world.
Yeah, what are the pillars in the church? What do the prophets always tell us? What are the pillars about the fall and the resurrection and pre-earth life? And all these pillars they have to be understood. You have to understand what Adam is and what the fall is.
The creation, the fall, and the atonement.
Is, and you have to understand those. And
those
are
going
the three
back
great
to periods.
Exactly what we're being taught today.
Yep. All right, so let's get finalized here. So then there's a proclamation sent throughout all the land. And this is 27. This is verse 27. Now I want you to take it from here.
Take what from where?
From the proclamation is sent throughout all the land, and
I'll take some.
This is where the geography comes in.
I know.
Okay, you want to take it from there? Or you want me to read part?
No, let's go right there to this slide.
Okay,
this would be great because we're starting out with Alma chapter 22, which is such a big, powerful geographic scripture that I'll bet you how many times is geography mentioned in Alma 22, over and over and over. And if you understand Alma 22, you understand the parameters that we need to have to make it work in the land we say is North America. Okay? And so one of the best places I have found for this is in Jonathan's book, in Moroni's America. He comes up with this map that helps you organize everything that is said in Alma chapter 22, verse 27 through 31. And what I think is important enough is to read as you, the audience, looks at this map, to understand that when I read and it says this, you see it on the map and you visualize it. So before I do that, I want you to look at this and just look at this area. Look at the three rivers, the big blue rivers there. The Mississippi on the bottom, coming up to the head of the River Sidon, which is where the Ohio River comes in, and just a little above that is where the Missouri River comes in. Okay? So there's kind of like a heading of the Missouri, the Ohio, and the Mississippi River that kind of come to that confluence.
Yeah, for those of you who are actually listening to this podcast, it forms kind of a Y.
Yeah.
With the Mississippi, the lower Mississippi at the bottom, the Ohio River goes off to the right side of the map, and then the Missouri River going off to the left.
Or the west, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got this big Y. Well, you can almost make that into square boxes and box it off so that it'll help you see what you're reading in Alma chapter 22. For example, if you see the box where the land Zarahemla is and Nephites, it's kind of in the middle. Think of this. Think of the main area with the head of the river Sidon at the very bottom middle, and then, like Rod said, the two rivers going up, the Ohio up to the right and east, and the Missouri going up and to the left, okay, and west. That Y, there's kind of a line right there, which we call, see this orange part, some of you that are looking on it, on the map, it says borders of Manti, head of the river Sidon, and the narrow strip of wilderness. So that area is kind of like U-shaped, but it's fairly close to east-west, but it's kind of U-shaped a little bit there, with it forming, everything above it is the Nephites. Everything below it is the Lamanites. And this Ohio River, basically with the head of the river Sidon and the Missouri, it makes a great narrow strip of wilderness. Did you know at times the Ohio River has not run? The Allegheny came, and then the Ohio doesn't start. It's all mud and grime and everything, and then it picks up a little bit because it kind of came up from North Carolina up through the Blowing Rock and over. There was times where the place where the Ohio River looks like a narrow wilderness. And what better explanation than a narrow wilderness when you're looking kind of straight, and all you see on both sides, because when you see a river, you don't see, it's open, right? It's not, but on either side are trees and so forth, but it's a strip, kind of right down the middle. And so we believe, meaning Jonathan specifically, and I adhere to it, that narrow strip of wilderness probably means those rivers or the river beds or thereabouts.
Because a wilderness, scripturally speaking, has been a number of different things. Christ talked about the wilderness, and it was a complete desert.
Right.
Other places you could talk about the river, wilderness being, like mountain ranges and so forth. But in this particular case, more than likely a wilderness was a place that was just non-inhabited. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't inhabit the actual river valley right next to the river because of the
flooding
issue
and whatever else.
Flooding that goes on. You don't want to have your house wiped out every...
They'd want to be on a tributary or something smaller maybe,
right.
Or fairly far off,
right.
maybe
right.
500 feet or even a mile, I don't know.
But they had some elevation change that they could get,
right.
So they could stay out of the flooding. But otherwise, you don't want to be in these
right.
The Ohio River Valley, or the Ohio River itself, if you've ever seen images of it or whatever, it's over a mile wide and along most of its path there as it gets closer and closer to the Mississippi River.
Right. So that's how you separate this. We think the way that it's described, as I'll read to you here in a minute, desolation is above all of those. Desolation is way north, okay? And desolation doesn't mean bad. People think, you say desolation and it's bad. Well, desolation means people don't live there. Well, some of the reason people don't live there, maybe it's colder, maybe there's not as many trees, maybe there was great battles that happened there, maybe with the Jaredites. Ever heard of Ramah? That's in desolation. People don't want to go there because of the stink, or because of the great traumatic events that happened there. So desolation doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means it's desolate. Like Jerusalem was called, "Oh ye desolate, oh ye desolate." Mm-hmm. Jerusalem was called desolation.
Yeah, but in the Book of Mormon, it actually does tell us a couple times that desolation was actually partially because what you said before, which was the Jaredites had become desolate there. They basically had exterminated themselves there. Also, they said it was desolate. They call it desolation because there had been trees, and they had been the civilization was so huge that they cut all the trees down, and so they couldn't really build there.
Right.
So it was desolate from that aspect of it too.
Good point. So as I read this now, I'm going to flip the slide. I'm going to stay on this so that you'll see it, but then I'm going to read. And as I read, I want you to find the location of what I'm reading about, and because it's hard to read and look at the same time. So I'll be your reader, you be the looker, and you see how what I read makes sense when you pick up where that's located as I go to this next slide here. Okay, so you see it looks the same, but the yellow part above I'm going to read, and I want you to look at it. This is Alma chapter 22, verse 29 starting. It says, "And also there were many Lamanites on the east by the seashore." So look over east on the seashore, which is way over there by the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, on the east by the seashore, whither the Nephites had driven them. And thus the Nephites were nearly surrounded by the Lamanites. Now look all around the boxes on the edges, on the outsides. You've got the sea or the eastern sea, sea east. You've got Lamanites on the east. Then on the north, you've got the sea west and the borders by the seashore, which is the Gulf of Mexico. And over on the west, you've got the wilderness of the west, and which is called Hermounts, and the wilderness in the land of Nephi. That's way out in the middle. In the middle is the pure, precious land that everybody wants. So the Nephites were nearly surrounded by the Lamanites. Nevertheless, the Nephites had taken possession of all the northern parts of the land. Now notice this. The northern parts bordering on the wilderness at the head of the river Sidon. So look at that head of the river Sidon in the middle of the entire map, which is right at the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi River. And the head of the river Sidon from the east to the west, roundabout on the wilderness side, on the north, even until they came to the land which they called Bountiful. The land Bountiful then is north of the narrow strip of wilderness, but it's south of the great seas, because that up further is maybe desolation up in that area. So Bountiful has a significant part. We call Ohio the land Bountiful, and we think that's pretty close. Okay, in verse 30 it says, "And it bordered upon the land which they called desolation, it being so far northward that it came into the land which had been peopled and been destroyed." So those are the Jaredites, "of whose bones we have spoken, which was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, it being the place of their first landing." So where did Zarahemla first land? Well, at Zarahemla, we think. They came up the Mississippi River and landed right there.
They couldn't get any
Now,
farther.
what is the significance, Rod? You were telling me about how a sail ship could get up the Mississippi, go the opposite direction.
Yeah, well, the Mississippi River is one of the few rivers in the world that, because of its sheer size, even though it is a river and it's running south, and just as a little side note, just want to point out to everybody that if you have older scriptures and you go back and look at the triple combination index under Sidon, it says Sidon, and it has comma, river, most prominent river in Nephite territory, runs north to a sea. And we've had so many people point that out and say, well, see, your river doesn't run north to a sea, so forth. So I actually wrote a white paper a number of years ago, and we got it to the correlation department of the church, and they basically, I said, that it does talk about having east and west banks, so we know it's either a north or a south flowing river because the banks were on the east or on the west. But nowhere in the Book of Mormon does it ever actually tell you the direction of flow. Does it flow to the north or does it flow to the south? It never says. It's been assumed that it flows to the north because of a number of different assumptions having to do with the fact that Zarahemla was north of the land of Nephi, and yet
it fit
land of Nephi was higher in elevation
than it did here.
Well, yeah, but also Nephi is higher in elevation than Zarahemla. If Zarahemla is north, and the place that's higher in elevation is to the south, then it would make sense that water doesn't run uphill.
Yeah, right.
So it makes sense it would have to be a north-flowing river. And that's exactly what you would think. But when you put it in a real-world setting, when you actually can see what is really happening in the geography, you understand that the land of Nephi around Chattanooga, Tennessee, is in fact higher in elevation than Zarahemla is. Zarahemla is in fact to the north of Tennessee and that area, but the Mississippi River still flows to the south because it flows around that area. It flows around the higher elevation of Nephi and goes over a little bit further to the west and goes around it and continues on south down to the Gulf. So it helps to actually have a real world setting so that these things that would normally throw you off if you were just speculating about it, all of a sudden the speculation goes away because
you don't need speculation
because you can see it.
But talk about the river and why you think the Mulekites went up the Mississippi opposite direction of the river flow. Yeah,
because the river is flowing south, but interestingly enough, the prevailing winds. As if you look at how hurricanes and so forth come up through there, the prevailing winds are typically from west to east, but they also typically from a little bit southern up to northern. So in other words, the weather patterns in the
they flow
Midwest
towards the way a
part of
boat would travel up the Mississippi.
Yeah, they're going up. And if you have a storm or something like that, or in certain periods of time or during the year, you would have actually the ability to sail upstream or upriver
How would you
in the
do
Mississippi River
that? How?
in a sailing ship.
How? You turn the sails a certain way, or
You just no, the winds just are blowing
that's
the
right.
sails in the
winds
right
are blowing,
direction.
and so you can go up a river that's going down. See, so
But these rivers are not fast rolling rivers.
Right,
Now,
right.
maybe in the springtime they are, but later in the summer and in the fall, they're really pretty. I mean, they are moving, but it's not a fast, speedy river. It's not.
but
it can be easily overcome by the wind.
But if the Mulekites came from the St. Lawrence and they're going towards the St. Lawrence, which is flowing out to the Atlantic, and they have to go against that river, the prevailing winds are not their hero.
No,
the
they're
prevailing
going in
winds
the
are
opposite
pushing
direction.
against them.
Yeah.
And then there's
They would be
the
going with
fact
the flow
of the
of the river.
Niagara Falls,
Yeah.
which could be a problem. And they could only get maybe as far as up through the lakes, maybe to Detroit. But then they'd have to walk from Detroit to Zarahemla.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make as much sense.
Well, I think that's just confusing everything because basically there may have been that there's a much more detailed explanation.
There
of
is. And
how
Wayne
they would
May
get
has
into
it.
that.
Wayne May knows a more detailed
Yeah,
way.
and I've actually
that
talked
works.
about it as well. But basically, the early Great Lakes were higher than they are now,
That's right.
and that caused the upper Great Lakes to actually, instead of emptying down through Lake Huron, then into Lake Erie, then into Lake Ontario, and then out the St. Lawrence Seaway. Anciently, the upper Great Lakes, basically Lake Michigan and Lake Superior and Lake Huron, all drained out instead to the Ottawa River Basin,
Right.
and then out through Montreal and then into the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Right.
And this is how the Jaredites actually were getting copper out of the Keweenaw Peninsula in the Lake Superior and out into the Atlantic Ocean,
And
where
part
they
of
could
the
then
way-
take it to Egypt.
And part of the way we believe Haygoth probably could have got out of there,
That's right.
up the
That's right.
Lake
Absolutely.
Michigan and around. Okay, well, I
That's a whole other long explanation.
yeah, I kind of busted up this chapter 22, verse 30, and then verse 31. But what I want to do is challenge you to go home and put this down where you can see it. Maybe make a copy of this, look at it, and then read it to yourself and see if it doesn't make sense. More so to you. I've studied this for a lot of years, and it makes more and more sense to me that this is the basics. If you look at a real map, you've got Nephi down in Chattanooga. You got Alma over a little bit further towards Memphis, and you got Mosiah and Mulek all the way up. And then we haven't even started talking about going towards Indiana and Ohio and up to New York.
That's all later on in the book.
And that's all later on. But I want to talk to you about Zeniff and a couple of others, Ammon and Limhi's 43. Okay, and just how they possibly could have made it from where to where. Mm-hmm. Okay, you remember Zeniff is around 200 BC, and this is in Mosiah 9 through 22. This is where all the flashbacks are, and you can kind of get lost. But where's your favorite place in this whole book, Rod? He loves the flashbacks. Anytime we ever got into the flashbacks, find those for me and tell them. There it is. What page?
Page 158.
158 in your Annotated Book of Mormon. Talks about all the flashbacks of you're speaking now, but we're talking about then or before or after or later, and it gets so confusing. This is the part that I used to shun from. I go, oh, I can't figure that out. Well, I think I've made it very simple. Let's look at Zarahemla at the top, and Zeniff lived up there. Okay? And we don't have a book of Zeniff, but we have, 20 chapters almost, or 10, 12, 11 chapters about Zeniff.
Of their people, yeah.
Well, Zeniff was up in Zarahemla, but he wanted to go to the land of Lehi Nephi, which is back to where his people were from, because he's a descendant of Limhi and Noah and all of those kings, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so he went back, and that's when he went and got given Shiloh and that area to take care of the sheep.
The king of the Lamanites.
Right, king of the Lamanites, and we know where that direction goes. So I just want you to see that Zeniff went from Zarahemla towards Chattanooga, which would be going south, but it would be going up into the height of Chattanooga, so to speak. Okay? Now there's two others that we talk about in the Book of Mormon. This is in Mosiah 7, 8, and 9, and I'm going ahead a little bit just to help you see this. Limhi's 43 were living down in Chattanooga. Okay? Limhi sent 40.
City of Nephi, yes.
Yeah, in the city Nephi at Chattanooga, Tennessee. Okay, Limhi sent 43 people to trying to discover the people of Zarahemla. Remember that in the scriptures?
Let's make sure we have everybody tied in here. So basically, Zeniff was the one that left Zarahemla, went down to the land of Nephi, essentially.
Right.
And then he died, and his son, King Noah, the wicked, took over. And then it was King Noah's son, Limhi, and they're trying to figure out how to get back to Zarahemla,
Right.
and they send these 43 guys.
Okay,
go ahead.
good. All right, and those 43 guys then went from the city Nephi, and they went probably up the Tennessee River, which is a north-flowing river, by the way, and at the junction of the Mississippi and the Ohio, they could have got turned around. They could, or because we know they traveled, wasn't it 40 days? And it should have only taken them 20, as I recall, or something. It says in the scriptures it was 40 days, but it should have been 20. We believe they got caught up on the Ohio River and went up towards Cumorah, and they didn't go up the Mississippi up to Zarahemla. So that would help us understand in 130 BC how they took a wrong turn, possibly, the Limhi's group. Remember? Because they went up, and didn't they find the Jaredite records? Mm-hmm. Well, they had to be up there somewhere close to Cumorah, where they were smart enough to bury the records. Maybe they were in Ramah. Maybe they were in Shem anyway. And maybe they went, see, I've got it going to Moundsville, but maybe they went all the way to Cumorah amongst the bones, right? Remember, they saw the big breastplates, and they brought probably a couple of them home, and they were oversized, and they had the 24
their swords were
records.
cankered with rust.
Right, they were cankered with rust. So they went up towards Cumorah. They didn't go up towards Zarahemla. That's why it took them so long, and they came back going, we didn't find Zarahemla. Isn't it interesting that all of the people are living somewhere that want to go back to somewhere where they're from? Is that like you and I today? Aren't we always looking after our genealogy? Well, they lived there. I wonder what happened to our relatives down there. What happened to those guys up here? You know? And let's then talk about Ammon 16. This is where I get twisted around again.
Oh, wait. Before you leave that, though.
Oh, yeah.
I just want to point out the fact that basically they have, if they left and went in the Tennessee River, when they got to the Ohio River,
right,
it would be very difficult for them to be able to differentiate between the Ohio and the Mississippi, because actually the Ohio is bigger than the Mississippi where they meet. But the Tennessee River would come into that. Maybe they mistook that for being the Mississippi River.
Right.
But again, they called the entire river system the Sidon,
right,
the Sidon River. And they would still be going north because they're coming into the Ohio. The Ohio is going to the east and to the north.
It's that Y shape going up.
And so they would still be going north. So if their instructions were, take this river, follow it till you get to a really big river,
right,
and then hang a right,
yeah,
okay, and then go and follow that river all the way up to its end. Basically, that's where you're gonna find it, Zarahemla. Which would be the case, but there's one there's one little jog in there where it goes from the Ohio down to the Mississippi, which is only about 15 or 20 miles or something like that.
Before it gets to the Missouri, and then there's the Cumberland, and then there's all that.
Yeah, there's all that. But they can tell the difference between the Ohio and the Mississippi and the Cumberland and the other. They're all smaller rivers in comparison. Yeah. So bottom line, they got up there. They were lost. It says they were lost in the wilderness for the space of many days. This is from Mosiah chapter 8, verse 8. Yet they were diligent, and they found out the land of Zarahemla, but they returned to this land. Well, if you've ever been seriously lost, how do you get back to where you started from if you're seriously lost? Well, the easiest way is all they had to do is just get back in the river. The river takes them all the way down. They recognize the junction at the Tennessee River. Right. When they get down to the Tennessee River, they go now up the Tennessee River, and they make it to back to the land of Nephi.
Yeah, it's easy to go back and see your way.
Yeah.
You know,
but they just got lost along the way.
The thing that's so difficult is right around 130 BC, it's Limhi. Around 118 BC, it's Ammon 16. Ammon is up in Zarahemla, and do you know, this is really interesting. I've always remembered this when I learned it. Ammon was Jewish. Ammon was of Mulek, of the Mulekites. He was of Zarahemla. He was wanting as a person of as a Jewish person, I believe there's some strength in him wanting to go down and find out about his Jewish, so to speak, brethren who came up through Lehi. I don't know. I think there's some kind of a Jewish connection I still like in there, but I believe, and maybe Rod can help me verify this, it's just kind of some things I think about as I go through, but I believe he was probably Jewish. As I look at all
technically, they're all kind of Jewish.
Well, they all kind of are. Because, well, but what I mean is more of they're not Nephite, so to speak. I mean, but Nephites are Jewish too. They have some Jew in them,
right?
Even though they're of Joseph,
Mm-hmm.
So it gets
complicated. They're all from Jacob ultimately.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But Ammon went from Zarahemla. He wanted to go back down to the city Nephi, and he took 16 with him. Now, didn't they go down first one time and then get lost, or they couldn't figure it out and they went back home, and then they went again a second time? I vaguely remember that. Or no, it was a different group before Ammon that went and did that, got lost, went back up. Then Ammon did it. Okay? Why are all these people searching after each other? They must love each other. They must want to get to know them. So anyway, we believe that Ammon, when he went back down the Zarahemla, or the Mississippi or the Sidon River, he got to that same confluence where the Ohio comes in. He could have gone straight and just gone a little east, and he could have veered off. You see, the bottom arrowed green line is the Tennessee River, and he should have just gone that way. But he could have very easily got lost on the Duck River or the Caney Fork River, because he didn't end up right back in Chattanooga. He ended up kind of in the area around it, remember, and he was captured as well. Ammon was. And so he then had to perform all that same type of thing. You got to go into subjection to me and give me this and be my ruler. And, there's so much similarity, it's hard to differentiate it, But this is just some possibilities to look at when you're looking at where they went and how they got lost and so forth. Now, I want to go over, as we've gone up to Missouri and Zarahemla, I want to now start going a little bit east, where let's go into Illinois, for example. Okay, we know that going into Illinois at Nauvoo, we know the land of Zarahemla is where the final battles in about 322 A.D. started. But we're still talking about being there at the time of, 100 B.C. and 120 B.C. and so forth. And the great battle with Moroni was 73 B.C., okay? So I want you to see, though, just look at the woodland sites of Illinois from 1000 B.C. to 750 A.D. All of those black dots that I got were, again, sites, not necessarily one dot per mound, but they're big complexes. And this is from, it's on the next page, it's from this source. The link is a project director is Bonnie Stiles, the Associate Museum Director of Science and Education in Illinois, in Licking, Illinois. This shows you all the pottery that it shows in the Illinois area from the Archaic, the Woodland, and the Mississippian area, which just shows you, look in the middle green section of Illinois. Those are all some of the cities we think, or the areas, the land Antionum, the land Jashan, Melech, Zelph, Noah, Zarahemla. This just shows you that we've used a lot of archaeology to confirm some of these paths. Not just we guess this path looks good, but it's backed by some archaeology. Mm-hmm. I want you also to be aware of something that I had never thought about. What did the ancient rivers look like? What about before the Adena? Or maybe during their time? What was the land like? I'm not talking 30,000 years ago, as geologists say, about the
ice sheet.
The ice sheet that came down. Who knows when that was, but I don't think it was 30 or 40 or 50,000 or billions of years ago. But this is what it left. Everything at the top in brown is that ice sheet coming down. Did you know there in the top right, around Chillicothe down to Blowing Rock, North Carolina, is a lake called Ancient Lake Tite? That's what it's called. And this is what it looked like back in those times. And it was the early formation of the Ohio River. And all of these white or yellow lines are rivers that flowed and was the original look of that area before we know it today as the United States of America. Lake tide existed, but the Great Lakes really didn't. They were kind of covered by an ice sheet, and it kept receding. Well, we have the Mississippi embayment. The Mississippi embayment is not just the river, but it's kind of the whole scope of the underlying escarpment under the river that won't allow it to go so far or so little, but it kind of is a layer, kind of like the Des Moines River Rapids. It's a layer of rock there that's an embayment, that it's not going anywhere. It's going to stay. You're going to go around it.
Kind of like the overall river channel, if
Yeah,
you will.
yeah, the channel. So there's all of this going on, and I want you to see how this relates to the land we call Zarahemla and so forth today. Look at everything in green is what we call either the land Zarahemla or the land Bountiful on this chart. That's all the way from Iowa all the way over to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All that green area in there. We have above it the Great Black Swamp, which is an extension off of the ancient Aragon River, which is Lake Erie. And that Black Swamp came out that far to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And the Grand Kankakee Marsh came out all the way past South Bend, Indiana, almost to Fort Wayne. And so there's a little gap in between these two Great Lakes. But then look at how Lake Tite was there. You can see the Ohio River flowing through it. There wasn't much land between the Great Black Swamp and Lake Tite. You know, there was maybe 150, 200 miles in there is all width. So that became precious area right around Columbus, Ohio. That's the prime area for the Hopewell Indians, is right in that area by enormous.
And Chillicothe, Ohio is where some of their big earthworks and so forth are located too, which would have been right on the edge of the lake at that point.
That's right. And the lake and Chillicothe to Newark was the Great Hopewell Road. There was a 60-mile straight road. You can see remnants of it today as well.
Newark is just to the east of Columbus, Ohio.
Right. So this is a better shot of that. You see in the middle, there's this green faded area. That's what we call the Plains of the Nephites that Joseph Smith described. The Plains of the Nephites.
They were traveling on Giants Camp.
Yeah, they were traveling.
Talked about we were traveling over the Plains of the Nephites.
That's right. And then Moroni was fighting back to Cumorah through that same route. But look above them. They had to go here because you have the Great Kankakee Marsh. The Great Black Swamp is an extension of Lake Michigan and Lake Erie. You got Lake Tite up there, and look at this. It was tight. It's a tight feed through the middle of that. And this great river up the middle is what's called Lake Scioto. And Lake Scioto is an important river in Ohio, but so is the Wabash. That's the river on the far left of the screen that goes all the way up to Bountiful. You see where Bountiful is separated from Desolation up there between the Great Black Swamp and the Great Kankakee Marsh. You know, folks, I am so much better at living this, believing it, and looking at it than I am telling it. This can get so complicated. I am telling you, but I love it. I just love following the rivers, following the escarpments, following the water basins, following the Great St. Lawrence Divide and the Eastern Divide. This is what I believe is something important called the narrow neck. Not the narrow neck of land. Let me show you this. All around we've been talking about, you see this little strip of yellow to the right is the land Bountiful. Everything in green is the land Zarahemla. And below the yellow line in the middle, that's the Ohio, that's the narrow neck of wilderness, narrow strip of wilderness. So where land Bountiful and land Zarahemla, I believe, is the Mississippi watershed, which is right close to the Wabash River, and it becomes a watershed means that water will fall in that area and will run to a river to its east or a river to its west. And it's a divide in the middle, a water basin like a continental divide where people could walk. It's a division of the rivers. They wouldn't walk across the rivers. They would walk where the source of the rivers start, and they would walk through those areas. Mm-hmm. And that would be the perfect place to walk.
Less swampy and so forth.
That's right. And so
that is if they're going across land. If they're
exactly.
not using the rivers, then they actually want to be avoiding the rivers if they're going around their land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, this is a map that I want you to look at, and I want you to think of the first thing that comes to your mind when you see this. I tried this on Rod. He was a little too good for me. I'm going to try this on Mike. Mike, what does that look like? Just looking at it. You people there at home, guess. What do you think this looks like? There is a really cool map that Mesoamerica has out. The Great Fantasy Map of Mesoamerica, doesn't it? Yeah. With that little neck in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And all the land above and below. Oh, man, you're going to love this. I love this stuff. I don't know. I am weird or something. I love this geography stuff. But look at where this is. This is so cool. This is right in between the Great Black Swamp and the Grand Kankakee Marsh. And that area in the middle of the two, that little pink line, is the narrow neck. It's not the narrow neck of land. It's not the small neck of land. It's not the line. Yes, it is. It's the line Bountiful Desolation. It's a line that goes through Desolation's above it and Bountiful's below it. I believe that's the small neck and it's the line Bountiful. The narrow neck and the line Bountiful.
And that's verse 32.
Could be.
That's verse 32 of Alma chapter 22.
Thank you. Verse 32.
It says, and now it was only the distance of a day and a half journey for a Nephite on the line Bountiful and the land Desolation, from the east to the west sea, and thus the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla were nearly surrounded by water, which, by the way, one of the things that we need to point out here, that is that the English basically that we're talking about here, the periods, the commas, and so forth,
right,
was not in the original.
They weren't in it anywhere, right.
There was no
Gilbert
punctuation.
Put them in there.
Yeah, there was no punctuation in Joseph Smith's, or the translation. So those punctuation marks and so forth, we don't know exactly where they were supposed to be, and that can change dramatically the overall meaning of things if the punctuation was in the wrong place. So we're just assuming that the punctuation is pretty close to the right place, and and so that's anyway. So, but it says, in the land of Zarahemla and the land of Nephi were nearly surrounded by water. Now, for a long time, that really threw me off because I'm going, well, wait a minute, the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla are nearly surrounded by water, but they don't say that about the land Bountiful.
Right.
Land Bountiful, they don't say is surrounded by water. But if you take a look at the maps that Ryan's been showing you, and you take a look at the land of Nephi, when it says surrounded by water, water could be an ocean. Mm-hmm. It could be a lake.
A river. But
it didn't say it was like large bodies of water or whatever. It said it was surrounded by water, not rivers.
Right.
Or not necessarily lakes and so forth, but they could be rivers or water.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then the land of Zarahemla, the land of Nephi, could be surrounded by water, meaning rivers. And if that's the case, then that's a perfect description of them.
Yeah.
Because the land of Nephi is surrounded on the south. You have rivers on the south there of the land of Nephi. The Tennessee River comes right through that. The Tennessee River is to the north, and you have the Ohio rivers also to the north there. The Mississippi River is to the west. And then the land of Zarahemla is surrounded by rivers. You have the Des Moines River, the Illinois River, the Mississippi River goes right through there. Mm-hmm. You have the Missouri River not too far away. I mean, there's just rivers everywhere out here. So they're literally surrounded by water, but instead the Ohio River, the Ohio Valley, only has really one main river that comes down through it with a lot of smaller tributaries that feed into it. But it's not surrounded by water. It's pretty much just one valley with one river going down the middle of it.
Yeah, true. Good point. So as you see on this next slide, I think the water basins are important. A water basin is, look at the red line above. All of the water on the west side of that flows into Lake Erie. On the east side flows to Lake Erie. Everything on the west side flows into Lake Michigan. So there's a separation of rivers where that red line is, called a water basin. If you go down to the orange line on the bottom, all of the water on the east side flows down into the Gulf of Mexico through the Wabash. Everything on the west side flows down the Illinois River down into into the Mississippi. That's called the water basin for those areas. Well, let me show you something that's kind of cool. If I go to this map, you've got the green part water basin on top. You've got the orange part on the bottom water basin. And then you've got two big lakes, the Great Black Swamp and the Great Kankakee Marsh, that almost meet, but they don't quite. Because there's this really important blue line called the St. Lawrence Divide. The St. Lawrence Divide cuts right through the middle of them, and the Great St. Lawrence Divide has an area in yellow in the middle here where there's nothing there but the St. Lawrence Divide, and it goes 25 miles long before it reaches the two water basins. This is what I believe is the narrow neck, where Hagoth took off from. This narrow neck is where the line separates Desolation from Bountiful. If you'll read in this, take the time that I have, it will blow your mind. It's blown my mind of how accurate it is as I read through it. It's like Greek to you right now. But to me, it's like, this feels cool. This feels like these geology markers are so important, because a Nephite could walk on the green line all the way down, the yellow line all the way down, the orange line. Could walk, because you're walking down where rivers flow on both sides of you. It's open.
You're just following a ridge.
Basically. Yeah, you're following a ridge that goes down.
These are not tall ridges. These are just
200 feet high, 50 feet high. Yeah. Just very small ridges you could walk over.
You can stay out of the swamps.
That's right.
The other thing that's interesting about this, though, is with the Jaredite description, when they're talking about the narrow neck, and they went down through the narrow neck, and they had serpents. They had a problem with serpents. Remember that?
Yep.
Well, you have two huge swamps, some of the biggest
Great Black Swamp
in the world,
all over. Yep.
And they would have a real problem with serpents.
They would.
There.
They would. And I've got a slide that shows the poisonous kind versus the non-poisonous, and the poisonous are all around the lakes, and down further into the plains they're not. I've done some research on the snakes and how the old ones were, and that shows you where they probably were. Probably around the edge of Lake Erie on the south side.
By the way, these swamps weren't even really drained completely until the 1800s. So this was definitely something that was been there for a long time.
The orange one, Grand Kankakee Marsh, was called the Everglades of the North. And it was beautiful, all kinds of stuff. It wasn't so much a swamp, but it's dried up since. Chicago sits right on top of it, where it used to be. And the Great Black Swamp was forcibly drained in 1850 or something,
they built a series of canals and so forth to drain it into Lake Erie.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the small neck, my proposal. Not the small neck of land. Haven't got into that. I've gotten into the narrow neck only. And we're going further east, so I want to go into Ohio. Look at this. 5,400 earthworks just in Ohio. Again, those are just possible sites of things. Folks, we've got so many opportunities. Look at this. The mound builders in Ohio. There's all these areas I go through with in this book called The Land Bountiful. Moroni's edition, Land Bountiful. And I go through 7 sections here of nothing but mounds. It's just, you want to be a moundaholic, they're right there, man. There are so many cool Hopewell things through there. Oh, it's cool. In fact, Rod even takes you on a trip and gives you mounds bars and calls us all moundaholics. I just say self-holic, it's better.
Yeah.
But there's so much through here. Look at this one. The Land Bountiful, the Land Zarahemla. This is a cool image. Everything in green is the forestry of the United States, and the blacker part is more plains, kind of open, kind of what you would call the plains of the area. Well, look at the two areas. In the red circle, I have the Land Bountiful, which is the Ohio area. And inside that Ohio area is where all the plush, beautiful vegetation is. And you need some of the plains. You need to be able to grow agriculture. You need to have corn and barley and all those kinds of things too. But this is the breadbasket, baby. This is the heartland of Moroni's America right here. And this is where we believe most of the stuff happened. It shows the narrow neck, the small neck, and everything. So let me go through those briefly with you. This is, again, the road from Great Hopewell in Ohio, from Chillicothe up to Newark. In orange is the Great Hopewell Road. They found traces of it. And it goes all the way up, and it's pretty cool. It goes into the Ohio Newark Earthworks, which we believe is the greatest plan of salvation you'll ever see. Here it is. And I want Rod to just spend a minute going through this, because I don't know if they've had a good opportunity for you to review the plan of salvation at the Newark Earthworks?
Actually, yeah, a couple of weeks ago,
Did
we had the Amberley Nelson.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And we had
so you
Amberley
did.
kind of go through all the details. So go back and check out the Amberley Nelson
Oh, good.
presentation, because she goes through and we go through the plan of
That's
salvation.
right. But this is amazing, folks. I remember first seeing this with Rod. He took us there and we went through it. And I got back to church. I probably shouldn't have done this. I was high priest group leader back then when it meant something.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
And I got back to class, and I have my good friend who was my previous bishop, who teaches seminary, who's a huge Heartland, huge Mesoamerica guy, and I love him to death. And I just felt inspired. I got to tell him about the Hopewell that I just saw. So I drew out this schematic on the blackboard and talked about the possibilities. This happened at 100 BC. This would have to have happened when there was peace in the land, right? Because these were not defensive works. These were ceremonial works. And what better than teaching the plan of salvation? You know, Ammon before, and all those guys that were teaching, come on over here, come up to Newark, and we'll take you through the plan of salvation this week. It'll only take 4 days, but we'll get you through it all. Get through all your ceremonies and everything. This would be cool in a real world area to take them through the temple. Right there with the Hopewell works. So let's move a little bit towards the end of the geography. Let's move a little out of Ohio into New York, where I call it just a special area. I call the area of New York and all the artifacts and everything, I call it Joseph Smith's Indians. The Iroquois Indians and the Algonquin Indians are special people with amazing stories in the past. And I love talking about them. I'm just now reading a new book all about the Haudenosaunees, which is the Iroquois. The Iroquois is a bad word. That's what the French call them. They're really the Haudenosaunees, which means people of the Longhouse. Okay? And they're the Mohawk, the Cayuga, the Oneida. The Onondaga is the best tribe of Indians ever. The Onondaga of Syracuse, New York, because Zelph's prophet leader was Onondagas. I think that is so cool. It's such a cool thing. Okay, now let's get to the narrow neck of land. Rod mentioned this earlier, and understand this is not anything that has anything to do with the Nephites. Think about this, what I just said. The narrow neck of land has nothing to do with the Nephites. It has everything to do with the Jaredites. Because it's Ether chapter 10, verse 20, that Moroni is writing about. And he's talking about this narrow neck of land. I just talked to you about the narrow neck, which is between the swamps. Okay? This is the narrow neck of land. This is the one that all the big boys talk about, the Panama, the Isthmus of Terampuca, Maruca, Darien. Mm-hmm. Is that what it's called? Or something like that. Darien. I make fun of that. I don't mean anything bad. I really don't. It's fun. I just like to have a good time. Okay? But it's not that. Okay? Look at this narrow neck of land in between the sea east and the sea south, which is Ontario and Erie. Look at that land in green right there in the middle, right by the Niagara Neck. Right through there. It's where the great city of Buffalo, New York, it could be Hamilton, Ontario, could be those, that goes right between the two. The seas divide the land, right? Mm-hmm. Well, let me show you. It doesn't say not the narrow neck of water. The narrow neck of water would mean, see this little narrow neck of water that I've shown you as a diagram? It's called the narrow neck of land that goes between them. Okay? For example, look at this. Look at Therampuque or Darien, the isthmus, in the bottom right at Guatemala. It's 140 miles at its narrowest distance. That would be what they would call the narrow neck of land, 140 miles through jungles, mountains, and cliffs.
And it was a day and a half journey for a Nephite.
Yeah, so a Nephite can go 140 miles through jungles. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's even right, because it's not where the narrow neck of land, it's the place where the sea divides the land. Look at Panama. It's where the land divides the seas. It's not the other way around. So this that you're looking up right here, there's 3 unique Book of Mormon necks. Read that up at the top. Number 1 is the narrow neck of land, this one, which we believe is Niagara. Number 2 is the narrow neck of Alma 63, which is where Hagoth, we believe, took off, which is what I previously showed you. And then there's the small neck of land that I haven't talked about that's here in Alma 22, verse 32 coming up. There's those 3 necks, not one. Most people think when you say any of these by neck, they think they're talking about the same thing. The narrow neck they call as the narrow neck of land or the small neck of land. It's not. It's 3 different places. And I learned that by taking Jonathan Neville's book and following it and reading through it. And it became so clear to me those are 3 distinct places. So here's where I want to show you something that is, it won't be hard to understand, but I don't want to lose anybody. Remember this, everything in yellow, right through the middle there, is the land Bountiful. It's bordering on the south of Lake Erie, all right? And the narrow strip goes between them, which is the Allegheny and Ohio rivers. Everything south of the Allegheny in green on the bottom there is the land south. So there's the land north and the land south. Now see these red, these are fortresses. In between those two, and this is all documented in the Antiquities of New York by Squire, or not Squire, but other guy. It shows you all of these things. They had fortresses on both sides because in between that is what they called the forbidden path or the forbidden area for any white people to go through. It's kind of like their buffer zone. Before you get to my great land of Cumorah over here, you got to get through this pass, then that pass before you get there. And they had it all fortified on both sides. And it describes this in some places in the history books that I have that you could read about. Well, in the bright red, you've got a narrow pass and a narrow neck of land. You see how my narrow neck of land is, if you go all the way for the Niagara width, from lake on top, which is the sea east, to the lake on bottom, which is the sea south, that's 24 miles from each. But if you go just on this little tiny red part, it's only 3 miles. I believe that's the real narrow neck of land, because above it was Lake Wainfleet and Lake Tonawanda, which were ancient lakes that flowed there, that have dried up since. And that narrow neck of land in the red is really narrow. It's like 3 miles distance, and it is the watershed for Lake Erie. You can walk on it. It's not water anywhere. You can walk on it. It's a lake watershed. So this whole setup, and the small neck of land is on the bottom right corner. You see the bright red circle. The small neck of land is where I mentioned earlier. It's called the Triple Divide. The Triple Divide is where one of the waterways goes north, the Genesee River, all the way up to the Ontario, Lake Ontario on top. One of the rivers is the Susquehanna, which goes down south into the Atlantic Ocean. And one is the Allegheny River that flows into the Gulf of Mexico. That's 3 rivers. And that small neck of land you want to read about in Moroni's America, because that also is a hardy area where the Native Americans would not allow whites. That's where they hunted, they fished, they traversed, they talked, they communicated, they had ceremonies, because that was the golden place to own, because you have access directly on rivers any of the 3 ways to anywhere in all of the heartland of the United States. So as I take all the fluff off of that and just show you, this in red is what's called the escarpments. Escarpments, like there's the Onondaga Formation, the Niagara Escarpment, these are like heavy layers of rock underneath the water or that flow above, that you can't get through these. You cannot walk across an escarpment. You can get over a falls like Niagara Falls, you see, is in the middle of the escarpment. You can get over that. That's why it's such a great falls. It goes over 2 escarpments. The Niagara and the Onondaga Formation are both gone over at the Niagara Falls. That's why it's such a beautiful area. And if I've taught you anything, These yellow lines going northeast to west and north to south are the two continental divides, the St. Lawrence Continental Divide and the one south, the Eastern Continental Divide, and the triple gap where they intersect is the small neck of land. As you go through this, it'll make more sense. This is an overview of the whole thing, Ether 1020. The narrow neck of land is the yellow part right in the middle that's just above the bottom red line. Okay? You see that narrow neck of land? Because you've got the Onondaga Formation in red below it, and you got the Niagara Escarpment above it. You can't travel over those unless you have a Niagara Falls. So you have to travel from Buffalo, New York on the land on this white dotted line to get out of there. And you still can't get over the formations. You have to go all the way up past Hamilton, Ontario, and up towards Lake Huron. You can't get across that big. The wider that red gets, the harder it is to get across. Okay? So you're kind of trapped if you get in the middle of that. This stuff is, I can make it real complicated. And this is the part that can get boring because it's overwhelming. But I'll tell you, this is the part, brothers and sisters, that I just love. I don't know what it is about this, but it just makes sense. Now, I'm going to show you kind of a couple last things. In the middle where it says narrow neck of land, you see that yellow in the middle, narrow neck of land? I'm going to blow that whole area up. So it goes from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. I'm going to blow that way up on the next slide. So you see at the very top, Lake Ontario, at the very bottom, Lake Erie. And what's in between there? Well, you got three colors, yellow, blue, and bright green. Those are all watersheds. You got three different watersheds that go through here. You've got the Lake Ontario in yellow drainage that flows north to the Ontario Lake. You've got the blue Niagara drainage that flows directly east into the Niagara River. And you've got the green one on the bottom that's very small that flows south into Lake Erie. That, I believe, is the condensed narrow neck of land. Not the 24 miles all the way across, but the 3 little miles in green down there. Why? Because look at these 3 archaic earthworks down here. There's 4 or 5 of these, and these all date to Book of Mormon times for the Jaredites, not for the Nephites. For example, you've got the McIntyre-Evans area, 3000 to 2000 BC. You've got the red area in there that's 2000 to 850 BC. You got 1600 BC, 1650 BC, and 1550 BC. All of those are documented, proven archaeology found right on that narrow neck. That's why I believe this is important for the Jaredites, not for the Nephites. This is the narrow neck of land for the Jaredites. This has nothing to do with the Nephites. Okay? As I have learned. The narrow neck does. The small neck of land does. But the narrow neck of land is pure Jaredite, if you'll start looking at it in that regard. And the small neck of land can become complicated, but it really isn't. It is wonderful. Look on one thing here. Look at the orange part at the very bottom. That's all the land Nephi. All of the yellow part right above it is the land Bountiful. What separates it? The Allegheny and Ohio rivers. And if I'm to go from the land Bountiful to the land Nephi on a straight line from where Buffalo, New York is, and I get down to Salamanca, New York on the Allegheny River, that's a day for a Nephite and a day and a half for a Nephite. To go from the land north to the land south on the line that is formed right here. So I have got identified the bright red marker is the day for a Nephite. The yellow dotted is a day and a half that you could go from the Lake Erie to the land south, which is south of the Allegheny River, in a day to a day and a half. And the small neck of land is over here to the right in Gold, Pennsylvania, where the Triple Divide is. I would take a picture of this, look at it, send me an email. I'll be happy to send you one of these. But you also can find them in this book, which is Moroni's America, that Jonathan and I did, that is wonderful. you'll gain so much from that. And it started from Jonathan's book, Moroni's America. He's got this in pocket size too, so those of you that aren't into geography like I am, it's just a tiny version. It's 30%. So you could read either little one or the big one, and then you get the maps to go with it, and it becomes a lot of fun as you read this.
You can follow along in the Book of Mormon, and as you go, and all of a sudden it starts to really come to life.
Oh man!
Which is what I think is kind of the most important thing that we're talking about here. It's a real history.
Yeah.
And of course a lot of these things are kind of speculation. We don't know exactly where these places are, but the fact that there's actually things that match up, and it matches up so beautifully, and even down to even a lot of the very details, it matches up. I think it really is a powerful yes.
Yeah. And this next slide I want to show you is in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, is the best picture that you'll ever see painting that sits in my home, the original, that was done by Clark Kelly Price. And this is all to do with Alma chapter 50, verse 8. And if you'll read Alma chapter 50, verse 8, you're looking right now at what is being described there by one of the most professional artists you'll ever meet. This is Moroni, and I believe this is somewhere on the Ohio River, probably somewhere around Pittsburgh or Moundsville, West Virginia. But this is a defensive thing. You'll see back in the very back the Lamanites coming forth. Well, where are they going to go? They're going to go into this big river, then up that big hill. Look at how he has fortified that. Remember how smart Moroni was in building this? And they stand up there all day and throw rocks at him. They just fall down the hill, I just think this is so beautiful on what it would have looked like back in those days. And Clark Kelly Price has maintained that. It's one of the last ones in the whole index. If you turn all the way back to the end of no, it's not. It's up by Moroni, Captain Moroni. It's on about 250 or something like that.
303 maybe.
But this is where I'm assuming or thinking that it might be from. That picture I just showed you, you see here in the red, it says Moroni had driven all the Lamanites out of the land. It's on page 304. This previous picture here is on page 304 of the annotated. Mm-hmm. And then this that I'm showing you right now, this map, is there's a place you want to look at in Alma 58, which he wrote this, where Moroni's army went all the way past into the East Wilderness, and they went down all the way to the bottom where there's a direct line. It says, and the land of Nephi did run in a straight course from the East Sea to the West Sea. And that is Alma 50, verse 8. No, it's not there. It's 50, verse 8 and verse 9. But I believe that these areas in number 1, number 2, number 3 are the areas that Moroni could have fought down into. In fact, I believe he could have gone down to number 3, Washington, D.C. That could be the great city Moroni, Washington, D.C. How would that be? To have that be the one that Moroni conquered when they talked about, and the land of Nephi did run in a straight course. Now, that's not in Alma 50. That's in 22 somewhere.
Right.
So I'm not...
Right.
I'm not giving it to you properly, and I'm not sure why I didn't have that written in here. But I'm reading from 22, verse something, that it ran in a straight line, and these are the 4 straight lines I'm trying to get you to. But I'm thinking that Moroni conquered that, then lost it all, right? They got pushed all the way back to Cumorah and back beyond that, and they lost all of that land at one point, because Moroni once captured that. He said we got it all. It did run in a straight course because we drove them all the way back to the line of their land of first inheritance. It said that as Moroni took them all the way back to that area, and then they lost it because of their wickedness again. And that's the last slide I end on, because I love Zelph. And I love Val Chadwick Bagley, who drew this cartoon for me. That is Zelph of Zarahemla. And when we have more time, Rod, at a later date, when we have another 4.5 hours, why don't we get together and talk about Zelph of Zarahemla? And now I turn over the rest of the evening to end it with a glorious spur of enthusiasm from Rod Meldrum, who's been sitting in that chair for a while, sharing this wonderful stuff with us.
All right, well, folks, we are grateful that Ryan's come and hopefully next time maybe you can tone down a little bit your enthusiasm. No, just kick it up a little bit of notch.
Let me get going on this. Okay, let me spend another 20 minutes with you on this map. Now, if you again,
no. Okay, so okay. So bottom line, everybody, we want to thank you for taking your time to the last several weeks and really going through a deep dive in the geography aspect of the Book of Mormon. Hopefully this has been something that you have wondered about, that you've, as you've read the Book of Mormon, you've wondered, gosh, well, I wonder, where would this have happened, and is there any evidence, and does this fit any place in the real world? Elder Holland, and I'll finish with this, is that Elder Holland gave an amazing talk at a chiasm celebration, and this is just a couple of years ago, and he basically talked about the greatness of the evidences. And he talked about how that we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints need to be, not only should we be looking for the evidences, but if we don't, we may be actually be held to some extent responsible for the number of people who would have joined the church and would have embraced the Book of Mormon if they could see the evidences. Yeah. Some people, just a simple, a heartfelt prayer and, feelings of the Book of Mormon is true is sufficient for them to at least begin their testimony. Some people think that the testimony is once you have that, that's it. You have your testimony. It's over. A testimony is something that is a living, ongoing thing. You either feed it or it starves. And so that's what we're hoping to do, is we're hoping that you'll feed your testimony. But basically, Elder Holland was saying that the evidences are important. In fact, it talks about in the Book of Mormon that the reason why Lamanites were converted was because of the many evidences which were shown to them of the truthfulness of the book. And he quotes Austin Farr, who talks about that that lack of evidence basically said if you have a lack of evidence, that's a real problem. And there's some great quotes there. We've already talked about that. It was actually in I think the second or third podcast that we did, so I'm not going to go through all that. But thank you everybody so much for joining us. We will see you next week. We'll be talking some more about the Book of Mormon here and continuing on with some later chapters about Alma. We are grateful for the opportunity to share this information. I hope that you're really enjoying this information and that it's causing you to want to do a deep dive and deep study of the Book of Mormon. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.
If you like this Come Follow Me supplemental study, click the like button and share it with your friends. You can also send your family and friends to bookofmormonevidence.org, which is a hub with all the links that you would like to the podcasts, to upcoming events, the store, at the 400 answers to the Book of Mormon. It might be fun family night to go over the 400 questions and answers. Visit Ryan's blog at www.bofm.blog. Our streaming site now has over 100 new videos from our virtual expo. Go to bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.